Please take your seats. The show is about to begin. Please take your seats. Axios' future of defense, space, satellites, and security is about to begin.
Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios political reporter Hans Nichols.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us. My name is Hans Nichols. I'm a political reporter here at Axios. I write a nightly newsletter called Hill Leaders. You can sign up for it at axios.com. It should land in your inbox at 8 p.m. every night. Sometimes that slides, but we're trying to keep that 8 p.m. deadline. I'd like to welcome up our first guest. We have a lot of great guests, but our first guest, because I'm interviewing, is our greatest. No. Senator Elissa Slotkin, soon to be the senior senator. Please come up. Great to see you. I'd like to start off with something that's in the news, but not getting that much attention, but sometimes on the periphery it is, and that is Venezuela and the president's strike on a suspected drug-carrying boat.
Yeah.
You've served in senior positions at the Defense Department, where I first got to know you.
Yeah.
Although it's unclear if we knew each other as undergraduates, but we don't really delve into that. You've served in senior positions at Defense, CIA. Tell me what you think of this as a CIA analyst, as a Defense Department. Is this a strike that should require congressional authorization? And have you been briefed, and should Congress be briefed on it?
Right. Yeah, I think, look, when I was at the Pentagon, we had standard operating procedures for how to deal with this kind of thing. That doesn't mean we were as aggressive as maybe we should have been, but there are ways that you engage these ships, that you can even disable these ships, right? Shoot out their motors, board them. The Coast Guard, this is what they do for a living. Hitting them without those standard operating procedures, I definitely have concerns about. And at a minimum, we should be talking about it actively as a member of the Armed Services Committee, or maybe the Intel Committee, whatever certainly Armed Services plus the Intel Committee, I think makes sense. But I don't, right now, the leadership on the Hill, the people who are chairing all these committees, are not looking to have a hearing unless Donald Trump is okay with that hearing. So we are not discussing it. At a minimum, we should get a briefing. But that is something we are actively discussing with the leadership of the committees.
So that's to say that you think Republicans in the Senate are abrogating their duties to do congressional oversight on military strikes?
Well, certainly on these military strikes, but for me, the much bigger elephant in the room is the fact that we have uniformed military, National Guard, and active duty in American streets, and we haven't had a hearing about that. And for the long-term sort of relationship between the American people and the uniformed military, that to me is a bare minimum. So that to me is the big one to have that we are not having. Venezuela also very important, particularly when there's bellicose language from the administration about doing more and threats. But I think I put it into the category of my colleagues literally laying down and ceding their responsibilities as an equal branch of government.
What can you do in your current role to change that? I mean, you're here talking to me about it, but is there anything you can do to force hearings or force more information? I mean, some of your colleagues, we've seen with Senator Shaheen, has been pretty crafty about putting holds on certain noms. What can you do?
I mean, I think there's banging pots and pans, both in public but also in private. Our ranking members usually have relationships with the chairman that go back years and years and years, and so relying on those relationships, like trying to ease them. And then what ends up happening is any other hearing that we have, for instance, on a confirmation of a nominee, turns into a proxy hearing about the big issue of the day. So about the National Guard and uniform and active duty in our streets, or about Venezuela. And we have confirmation hearings this week. I'm sure that's exactly what will happen.
An opportunity to really hold them.
If you're not going to let us have a hearing about, in the United States of America, having uniformed military on our streets in a way that is absolutely contradictory to our history, then I don't know what we're doing in these committees, and we're going to find any way we can to raise those issues on behalf of our constituents.
I'm glad you mentioned constituents, because you've just done this big listening tour in your home state of Michigan, and you talked about this in your Council on Foreign Relations speech, the trust deficit. It seems to be almost apolitical, nonpartisan, this trust deficit. There's anger at both parties on the way global affairs, foreign affairs has been conducted over the last 20 years. How does Congress, how does the country, how do policymakers win that trust back?
Well, first of all, just to be clear, I decided to give a national security speech, and so I did something that I would have really not even thought to do 15 years ago when I was at the Pentagon. And I said, let's have town halls on what Michiganders want out of national security. What do they expect out of their government? What do they think of when they think of foreign policy? And I did events in Benton Harbor and Troy, Michigan. And it was extremely interesting because, number one, there is still a desire for American leadership in the world. It wasn't like, forget it, I'm an isolationist, I never want to do anything abroad. They want to be the leaders because they know, especially in a state like Michigan, that if we're not leading, no matter our faults, it's going to be China leading or Russia leading, and they'd rather have us than anybody. But, the middle of the country is also who fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? They're the ones who watched us in these forever wars, and whether they were left-wing people or right-wing people or wherever they were, they felt like we had not succeeded in these endeavors that we did. And in the meantime, their lives have gotten harder. Their middle-class lives have gotten harder to sustain. So there was this real feeling like it can't be words, it can't be a speech that's going to bring and bridge that trust deficit. It's about how we engage abroad and earning back some of that trust. And I think for me, talking with them, I realized, with all the ways defense and national security are changing, the way that technology, right, is going to absolutely fundamentally shift how we think about defending the homeland. We are not doing, because we're such a mess here in Washington, we're not focusing on the truly strategic issues around national security, which I believe to be economic security, tech security, and making sure we understand that right now our citizens are on the front lines of this fight.
You mentioned tech. I think a lot of times when we hear tech, we think cyber.
Yeah,
and
cyber,
you have, and beyond that, but you've talked about the idea of a cyber national guard.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Does that mean I'm a really smart programmer at Google or Microsoft or somewhere, and then once a month I go and serve in a cyber force?
So first of all, just to make sure we understand, when the volume of cyber attacks that are going on against our citizens every single day is insane, right? If those were little bombs going off across the country, we'd be in like full-scale mobilization at this point. So, for instance, when I was a congresswoman last year, every single K through 12 school had been ransomed. Some had paid, some had not for their kids' data. Every single hospital had been ransomed. Some had paid, some had not. We know through the stuff that we all read here in Washington about the Chinese, the way that they've gotten into our telecoms, into our infrastructure. And to me, we're just kind of like leaving our citizens without any tools. Some of them will call, right? That superintendent of your kid's K through 12 school will call up the Michigan State Police or the FBI and say, they took our data and now I'm having to pay in cryptocurrency, some weird, thing, can you help me? And the FBI will be very honest and they'll say, unless it's a really huge sum of money or we catch it so quickly, there's really no capacity with what the staffing they have right now to go after these threats. So they're just like being attacked and nothing's happening. And for me, having a cyber national guard that can be brought in when there's truly a big sort of infrastructure attack, when there's been something significant that's happened that can help in that moment. Our schools and our hospitals don't know exactly what to do. That to me is at least an interesting option to consider.
Are our schools and hospitals paying these ransoms?
Some of them, yes. It depends. If you're a school and you haven't made an accurate copy of all the kids' data, and you're out in like Pinckney, Michigan, and you're not trained on cybersecurity, you haven't gone through all that work. You're just trying to teach kids, and then someone takes your only copy of everyone's data, everything about that child, their learning issues, all that stuff. Some schools make the decision to pay.
You've also talked about new alliances, a lithium alliance, a chips alliance. What do those alliances look like? Mm-hmm. Are they NATO light? Are they stronger than NATO? Is it just a trade alliance?
Yeah, I think part of looking forward on national security is sort of being open-minded and creative on what we mean by alliances. And for me, especially coming from Michigan, supply chains, our supply chains are part of our national security apparatus. We must secure access to certain critical items. We're not going to be able to produce, nor should we, produce every single chip that we're ever going to make, or we don't have all the rare earth minerals that we're going to need, but we can form alliances that have common rules, common export control procedures, common trade rules, and then an ability to sort of blunt against Chinese coercion. That's what we're seeing right now, is like China is picking off small countries, let's say one of the Baltic states, and being like, we're gonna withhold your supply so that you, small Baltic state, are gonna be in trouble. That to me is a real vulnerability. So creating some rules of the road, I would call it Article 5 light. I don't know that we're going to war, but we are certainly gonna take common action.
But Article 5 implies not necessarily military action if there's attack against one, it's attack against all, but it requires a response. Mm-hmm. So is that going to be a military response or an economic response if, say, Latvia is coerced?
No, I think first and foremost, certainly it's an economic response. It's a diplomatic response. I will say where I am very open to, and we should all be thinking about new doctrine and a new approach for these threats of the future. If Russia and a group from Russia conducts a cyber attack in Michigan in the middle of winter, and 180 elderly people freeze to death in their homes. What's the proper proportional response? What do we do as Americans to respond to that attack? Right now, the answer is mostly nothing. We have cyber tools, we have offensive tools. We don't have great doctrine on how to use it. In our system, we don't typically go after elderly Russian citizens in their homes. That's not our typical way of handling things as a modern military. But what do you do when they kill your citizens? It's an honest-to-God question of how, in the future, we use these new tools. And I would offer that if you conduct a cyber attack on our infrastructure that has the same death toll and destruction that a kinetic attack would typically have, you should be willing to consider that, potentially, depending on how big it is, an act of war and respond militarily. And that's what we're not able to do right now. We're not able to say that if we had a cyber 9/11, right, and the entire eastern seaboard goes out of power and people in hospitals pass away and all those things, we don't have doctrine for a proportional military response.
And so you want that clarity also to act as a deterrent to send.
We have zero deterrence on cyber attacks. Right now, the United States of America, we have deterrence on military attacks. Most countries of the world do not want to tangle with us. But a cyber attack on our infrastructure so that China's in our entire telecom system? I mean, I was part of the hack of OPM that took all the data from government workers, right? All my personal data, all the forms that I turned in to get my security clearance. And it's like, oh, they have everyone's data. We have zero deterrence on it, and we need to reestablish deterrence.
When we're talking about chips, everyone here is probably aware at this point that 60% of the world chips, 90% of the high-tech chips come from Taiwan. You visited Taiwan as a member of Congress. You're intimately familiar with it. I always like to ask this question because I never get the same answer from senior officials like yourself. What's your best estimate on the Elissa Slotkin calendar on when China might cross the strait?
So, look, I don't think anyone knows for sure that China has made an affirmative decision. I don't think it's a secret that while we were busy fighting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, China was busy investing in technology meant specifically to undercut our military advantages. And while we were building Humvees and JLTVs and important things for Iraq and Afghanistan, they were saying, we're not going to go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with the United States, tank on tank. We want to undercut them, particularly in things like space and cyber, so that America could go blind, deaf, and dumb in the first moments of a conflict. They invested in that. They were ahead of us on that. I think that means this next couple of years, 3 to 7 years, are a period of real vulnerability. It's just like a normal competition. They invested, they got ahead of us. This is why I was one of the few Democrats who supported the standing up of Space Force, right? It's just, separate from the Star Trek-y kind of part of it, they are eating our lunch in space. And that's a problem for everyone who's sitting here looking at your phone, right? So I think for me, I don't have anything more specific that in the next 6-7 years, we have a continued period of vulnerability that we need to watch very closely.
So it doesn't, you said 3 to 7 and 6 to 7. When does the window open when the risk is very acute that China crosses the strait?
Look, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, we get classified briefings. And you have what you have. For me, I'm not going to sit here and expose American vulnerabilities and classified information, in public.
Can we just do a quick one on the digital dollar and China, and walk us through how dollar dominance is an important national security issue? It's important to global security and the international financial system. What does the U.S. need to do to counter China in the digital cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, I think the bigger point is that America, we basically built the global financial system or rebuilt it after World War II, and it's based on the dollar. And every single person here watching benefits from the fact that we built that system in our image. It helps us with our mortgage rates. It helps us with our 401ks. It is incredibly important that the dollar remain the global financial currency of the future, not just the present. And if we haven't noticed, certain countries and industries are just skipping traditional banking and going right into crypto. This is why cryptocurrency is a very important issue, even though it gives some people the heebie-jeebies, right? So
Do you own any crypto?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. And I'm also like the author of the no stock trading bill, so I do very little outside of my important salary from the U.S. Senate. But I think for me, I want to make sure that it's our currency that's the backbone as we transition across the world to digital currencies. So we talked about the country of Kenya, right? They've skipped over banking, right? You wanna ride a matatu or a bus in Kenya, you pay with crypto. What is that keyed to? Is it keyed to the dollar? It's important that it's keyed to the dollar. If we enjoy sanctions as a tool of diplomacy, that involves us having control of that currency. The Chinese are very interested in the currencies of the future being tied to their currency. And so for me, this is part of how we maintain our leadership role in the world. That means we need to do things like put left and right limits around the crypto world, and I voted on the Genius Act, but also issue a digital dollar, which is something that the Chinese did back in 2020. They issued a digital version of their currency. It just, to me, if we want to be in the game, we have to at least start this conversation. If the speed of commerce is now digital, and we need to issue our own digital currency.
Senator, the speed of this conversation flew by. We're 3 minutes over. That's all we have time for, but I'd like to thank you for your time and welcome up our next guest. Thanks again.
Thanks, Hans.
Please welcome to the stage Axios defense reporter Colin Demarest.
Hey y'all, what is up? Thanks for being here this morning. I am Colin Demarest. I write Axios Future of Defense. It's a weekly newsletter out every Wednesday. Read, subscribe. You will not regret it, at least I don't hope so. Thanks for being here this morning. Quick plug too, we have the Axios Future of Defense Summit coming up October 22nd. You can go to axios.com/events to fill out that interest form and hopefully come hang out with me later next month. And with that, let's get started. Our next guest is one of the leading voices on space and intelligence strategies. She previously served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, and today directs the Aerospace Security Project at CSIS. Please welcome Carrie Bingham. Busy times to be directing the Aerospace Security Project.
I thought Senator Slotkin hit the nail on the head. I mean, China is eating our lunch in space, and we're at a vulnerable moment. So
that's a perfect way to start, because I wanted to start broad with you and kind of get a temperature check. What is your assessment of the standings in space? Who leads, who's second and third, and how long will those standings stick?
Well, I mean, I think that the United States is still the leader, but what I worry about greatly is China is quick on our tail, and they are intent on surpassing us in space. This is the most consequential threat and the most consequential competitor. And just to give a sense for just how much space is weaved into their national psyche, look at the New York Times New Year's Eve. You had iconic images New Year's Eve of the ball dropping in Times Square. In Sydney, it's fireworks over the harbor. The image that Beijing projected domestically into the world were dancers on a stage with giant backdrops of taikonauts. So they are weaving space into their psyche.
Is it fair to say there's another space race afoot, or is that a bit exaggerated?
So, I think that there is. And one of the things, this is an opportunity for me to talk about some of the research that we're doing. We are focused, I know the intelligence community, Defense Department's focused on what the PLA is doing in space, counter-space weapons. I'm sure we can talk about that. But there's another piece to this puzzle, which is what they are doing on the commercial and the economic front. And we talk within the defense industrial base right now. China's shipbuilding outpaces us 230 to 1. Ukraine is able to produce something like 200,000 drones per month. I mean, would it surprise you here today to know, and we're tallying up the numbers, that China has invested a lot of money down to the local level to build up these gigafactories and mega factories to produce on the order of 3,500 satellites per year. 3,500. I mean, that is eye-watering. I mean, we'll see if this follows the story of the real estate, what happened, 2 decades ago, but they have capacitized and they are intent on overtaking us, whether it be in SATCOM, satellite communications, remote sensing, launch, et cetera.
Just because you can produce it, though, doesn't mean you can necessarily put it in space at that same rate. So where is that choke point, I guess?
It's interesting. I mean, we're seeing them build up capacity, but I think they're still having quality issues. They're still having test issues. Of the satellites. I mean, I think they're still having quality issues with their satellites. I think that they're still having issues in test with their launch vehicles. So, there's something like 10 space launch startups right now in China. Not all will be successful. Some are having pretty colossal failures in launch, but they don't need all 10 to be successful. I mean, this is a bit of Darwinism and seeding. Let's see who will rise. Let's see who's successful, and let's let those run. And that's what I'm watching out for. You pair what, they looked at Starlink. Hey, Starlink, I see you, I raise you, Elon. They have no less than 4 equivalent Starlink, like 10,000 satellite constellations in various stages of design, development, launch. Again, you don't need all 4 of those to be successful, but 1 or 2, and you pair that on top of what they're doing with Belt and Road, 5G, et cetera, I mean, that is a significant threat for our businesses and our overall positioning in the global marketplace.
To your point earlier about drone production, satellite production, how does Washington keep up with Beijing's civil fusion then?
I mean, it's a great question. I wish I had the silver bullet answer, but I mean, I would say, for me, U.S. leadership in space, it is a more strategic approach than just these one-off, two-off investments. I mean, it is the U.S. government being a customer, buying, integrating these capabilities and services. It's the U.S. government shaping the market. You can also invest left of the curve here. But then also it's the policy and the regulatory piece. I know the White House put out recently an executive order on commercial, deregulation. That's a piece of it. But I would go even further. Having spent time at a space startup that provided, remote sensing kind of services that you could use for maritime domain awareness, illegal fishing, I mean, that stuff is ITAR. So I get it. You want to, obviously protect our technology from going to China. But many of these space companies nowadays, especially in the commercial world, have phenomenal capabilities for maritime domain awareness, countering illegal fishing. And if that's going to get stuck in ITAR, that just does not make sense, and it doesn't make our companies fast and responsive, as well as, I think space is just tremendous soft power that our industry has, and we have to allow them to frankly go forth and apply it on the global marketplace.
And so you are at Hawkeye, but there's a bunch of other companies like Maxar, like Planet Labs, like Black Sky. What do you think those commercial players have done to battlefield transparency, to intel collection, to intel sharing? I think a lot of people think of Ukraine, late 2021, seeing those images of the buildup on the Russian border.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm working on a book chapter right now looking at space lessons learned from Ukraine. And one of the most interesting stories here is just, you look at Ukraine, not a space powerhouse, very little organic space capability, but access to space data, imagery, radar imagery, an ability to detect and locate sources of GPS interference. I mean, it provided them a bit of an equalizer on the battlefield. And you pair that with some of this other great data and information coming in, some of these fusion engines. It was an equalizer on the battlefield. But the challenge is, and I hinted at this with China, even Russia, others, is we don't have the market cornered on satellite imagery right now. There is a race underway. China has gone gangbusters in this area. Our European friends are making strides in commercial imagery as well. Russia, Wagner Group bought commercial imagery from China. So it is proliferated. More people have access to it. It is an increasingly transparent battlefield. I think 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our forces, we dominated in air superiority, space superiority, electromagnetic spectrum superiority. We just don't have that luxury as our forces prepare for potential crisis and conflict in the Indo-Pacific. So They will be seen, maneuver will be seen. The element of strategic surprise, I think, will be harder to come by.
So what are those ramifications then? Like, what does that do to the US military, to the force structure, to how troops actually fight, if there was a fight?
I think first, from a training and exercise perspective, our forces need to be put into environments where they're being watched. Their emissions, their signatures are being detected. So how do they operate under those kind of contested and transparent conditions? In the Cold War, our nation was very good at denial deception. Maybe we need to bring back some of those lessons and adopt them for this modern technology era. And then, I was fortunate to do many trips into Iraq and Afghanistan when I worked as a staffer in Congress. We did have I'll say, even there, fixed sites, fixed hospitals, fixed operating centers. As you think about the Indo-Pacific, those fixed sites are going to be targeted. So you either defend, you defend Guam, you defend your runways, et cetera, but you also have to think much more in terms of mobility. And I think you're seeing some of that. You're seeing some of that with the Air Force. Obviously, the Marines are thinking much more about mobility. Logistics is a big issue. So all of those pieces come into play.
And so we have about 2 minutes left. I definitely wanted to ask you about, I know, time flies. Golden Dome, your assessment, is it possible, realistic, cheap, expensive, and what does it mean for the state of the world?
Yes. And I guess I get the luxury of talking about it.
Yes, yeah. I'll ask the others too, don't.
I've said, I don't think that this is a science problem. I really see this more as an engineering and an integration challenge. I'll start with the threat. We just saw China parade many new weapon systems. Russia also is developing an array of nuclear, hypersonic, underwater weapon systems that can reach the United States homeland in ways that we just didn't, we didn't have 10, 20, 30 years ago. So when I think about the threat to the United States homeland, what are the defenses we have today? We have 44 ground-based interceptors in Alaska and in California. After 9/11, we have some, I'll say, defenses here of Washington, D.C. and a couple other places. But I think the United States homeland is vulnerable, and I think that there's bipartisan recognition of that. So there are a lot of ways to address that. If I think, if Golden Dome, near-term options, there is a lot of kit that exists today that you could buy more of, you could modify, you could stitch together. But then that becomes an integration challenge.
The networking side of it.
It's the networking side. Now, there is a space component, both space sensors, space-based interceptors back on the table. And the Congressional reconciliation package that was passed a couple months ago, 60% of that over 60% of that Golden Dome money was going towards space. So space plays a really central role in Golden Dome going forward. The last thing I'd say about it is, I know that DoD officials can't talk about it, but God, they need to be able to talk about it. And I would encourage, whether it's through congressional hearings, via other platforms, get out and talk about it. One, message our adversaries, but really, we all need to understand what are the architectural details, what are the priorities, how are you matching budget or funding to programs, but also for many companies here, you all are making decisions about FY26, where you prioritize and allocate your resources. You need to know how you should allocate resources for various Golden Dome capabilities.
And to wrap us up real quick, what stuck out the most, what shocked you the most, what interested you the most from China's military parade?
It was the totality of the weapons that they showcased. Over roughly a dozen new systems they showcased. Many of the nuclear systems they showed were only long-range systems, so systems that could target the United States. They showed a full nuclear triad. But it really, for me, was the speed and scale. They did this parade, 10 years ago? Didn't have nearly the scale of the weapons that they had today. So the variety of them and the speed at which they're going. I had a colleague say, is this a Potemkin arsenal or is this like the real deal? We'll see. Each of these systems are in various stages of development, test, production, fielding, et cetera. But they are moving incredibly fast. So whether it be in those conventional systems, nuclear systems, space systems. I mean, we really do have to watch our six because they are coming. And as the previous discussion highlighted, President Xi has said 2027, we need to be ready. Not that he's made a decision to go to war, but we need to be ready. And he clearly is showcasing the arsenal and reminding the force, hey, party's in charge here. This is the arsenal that we have available to us.
We're going to have to leave it there, Carrie. Thank you for your time, and thanks for hanging out today.
Absolutely.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Of Axios. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning to join us today. We're very grateful for all of you being here. We're also hugely grateful for all of our partners at Axios. Nothing we do at Axios is possible without the support of our partners, the investments we make in journalism around the country, awesome events like this. So huge thanks to United Launch Alliance for making today possible. And I'm actually super excited to welcome to this stage for a View from the Top conversation, the CEO of United Launch Alliance, Tori Bruno. Tori, welcome to the stage. Good morning, sir. How are you? Always fun talking about space, but I think we should best maybe start big picture. Why is a conversation about satellite space and security so important right now?
Oh my gosh. We are in a race right now with China in space because for China, space unlocks the invasion of Taiwan.
So go deeper on then, what do we need to do about that? Like sketch out the challenges that presents.
Well, you know, Senator Slotkin actually touched on this already.
Yeah.
Without space, we don't have basic military operations. It's not a force enabler anymore. It's the basic capability that allows us to operate. And so when China looks at a conflict with the U.S. here on Earth, space is the thing that levels the playing field. Our Navy and Air Force is formidable. So that conflict actually starts in space, and then that opens that door. And that race right now is that China has been investing billions of dollars and years to build anti-satellite weapons.
Right.
Every single day, they are designing, building, and fielding more. And we are trying to balance that out by making our systems less vulnerable. And right now, our strategy has been resiliency, which primarily means for us being able to absorb attacks, take those hits and keep going, and we're doing that primarily in LEO. But that's only half the strategy.
Right.
At some point, you can't just keep absorbing damage, you gotta defend yourself, you gotta fight back, and that's where we really gotta catch up.
Let's go a little bit more, like when we talked before, there was a phrase you used which was really interesting, like the framing of space as, it used to be a nice to have, now it's a need to have. Do you think like the giant industrial space complex United States, the political complex has like caught up to that conclusion, or are you still sort of pushing that argument?
I would say that light bulb is just starting to glow.
The glimmer, maybe, it's not on.
We went for a long time while China was investing because we were distracted by the global war on terror. And so they were stealing technology from us and developing capabilities. We've only just kind of woken up to this problem and realized we are behind.
What does that look like in a practical sense? You know, like the senator, you know, was pressed a little bit on like when this might actually flare up in China and around Taiwan. What are those capabilities that we can paint a picture of like what we have now and what we need to prepare for that, and how a conflict like that with China?
Yeah, sure. So what we have now are a blending of, I'll call it, very capable, exquisite satellites on orbit that are few in number, which makes them kind of a juicy target, and an increasingly disaggregation of those functions into smaller, less capable, but network satellites. Mm-hmm. And the idea is have lots and lots of targets and make it more difficult to bring down the whole capability. And that's that sort of race we're in right now. They're putting up weapons, we're putting up targets, and we're staying just ahead of them. You hope you have
more targets than they have weapons, so some of them less, right?
But that's not going to work indefinitely. So now, under this administration, we are allowed to look at counterforce, which is a term of art. It really means, can you shoot back and defend yourself? Because sooner or later, you got to make them stop shooting at you, or they will degrade that capability.
Right.
The problem is, or one of the problems, I should say, is that, you know, the most obvious and easiest place to disaggregate first is in low Earth orbit. And the reason that's a problem is because it is very accessible.
Yeah.
It's 15 minutes away by rocket. It's LA to San Francisco, and they are investing in that. Our technology is still better. So I've heard a lot of people say, oh, they're way ahead of us in space. I think it's important to understand that the foundational technology is at least 2 generations ahead of them. Where we're behind is applying the technologies they've acquired largely from us to weapons in space.
We're ahead now. How long will that last? Is this a race?
It is a race, and we got about 5-8 years top.
5 to 8 years. All right. So like we're here in the shadow of the Capitol. Like what I love about Axios events is when we have topics like this on this policy, the people who care are the ones who show up. They're the ones who affect the policy, or at least think they do. Maybe their bosses do. What's their advice for them? How can they help ensure that lead remains?
Keep doing what we're doing and pivot to this counterforce mission. And don't forget that the great power of our system is this partnership between government and industry. We don't have a directed economy. We don't have top-down control of what gets developed. We have room for innovation. And especially when we're in threat, the bigger and broader the industrial base, the better.
Let's talk about the people who are paying attention here. You mentioned the administration has slightly better tack on this. How is the Pentagon? How can the Hill help?
Well, the Pentagon has finally got a branch. It's got a Space Force.
Right.
That is so important because not only is space critical, like we just talked about, without it we can't do basic military operations. The domain, the tools, even how you acquire things is just completely different than sea or land. So you need that ability to specialize. But they're still just a brand new service. They're trying to grow. They need way more resources than they have. I think if you do it in real terms, you would understand that their budget's probably declining. It ought to be just growing and growing so that we can get in front of this power curve. Congress plays the role in enabling that, obviously.
So the homework for Hill staff here when they go back up to their bosses is head to the Appropriations Committee. It needs more money. This needs to be funded to keep this kind of
You need funding and you need programs.
Right. Let's spin this forward. So what does this look like in the ideal state in the future? Like if Space Force is supported like that, what does space look like 10, 15 years?
Yeah, it is understood to be a mature warfighting domain, and we have targets that are targets. We have capabilities that are sufficiently robust that they're difficult to address, and we have an ability to protect them, and therefore they are deterred from even starting an aggression in space. We have all of the norms that we have at sea, in the air, and in the nuclear world so that we know what we're saying to each other when actions are taken, and that locks down terrestrial conflict here because, again, to level the playing field, an adversary like China will start the conflict in space. If they can't start, they can't go.
There's a framing you used before that I want you to use again here because I think it was so interesting about the rules that the Navy has created in the sea, we need to create in space. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're at sea on a military vessel and someone blocks your path, a shot across your bow, all of these things are clear communications that have been established literally at sea over centuries. You know exactly what you're being told, and you know exactly what the next ladder of escalation is going to be should you choose to climb it. We have none of that in space, and that leaves us at risk to misunderstandings. So if a Chinese inspector satellite approaches a critical U.S. asset and comes very close to it, could physically interact with it, what are we going to do? Do they know that we might react to that as if it were a threat or an attack on our sovereign territory? If they don't know, that's a problem.
So it's important, like the action and analysis, start to figure that out. We're about to get the hook, but it actually will have to end on one fun thing. So I want to end on one space thing up here. We were talking earlier, but I'm trying to get my kids excited at space. I'm excited at space because I remember the first space shuttle launch. You have a better first space memory.
I'm a little bit older than you, Nick. I can remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at a black and white TV and seeing Neil Armstrong step onto
Probably the best kind of space memory. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Something to keep focusing on. Tori, thank you so much for being here today. Huge thanks to United Launch Alliance for making this possible. We're going to bring Colin back up for the big finish.
Welcoming back to the stage, Colin Demarest.
Hey, y'all. I'm back for our final two conversations of the morning. Our next guest is a former Marine officer and the ranking member of the House Armed Services Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Please welcome to the stage Congressman Seth Moulton. Thanks for making the trip down this morning. Let's start broad, as I did with Carrie. How are you thinking about space competition with Russia, with China, with all the other maybe spacefaring states?
Well, I'm thinking that we've got a lot of work to do. And the good news is that we've come a long way in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, when I started on the committee about a decade ago, it felt like space was where we were most behind in terms of the curve. We might have been, in absolute terms ahead, but the pace of our space development was not nearly as fast as our adversaries, particularly China, and we've done a lot to improve. We're in a much better place today in terms of putting the capabilities up there that we need and getting that done quickly. But the problem is our adversaries are accelerating as well, and there's no question that I think space is the most important warfighting demand. It's why I've chosen to be on that committee right now.
Who or what do you credit to the bump in U.S. performance?
Well, I mean, there's been tremendous increased focus on space from Congress. There are a lot of us in dark rooms asking really tough questions for a while. Mike Rogers has been, I think, done a great job, and his predecessor, Mac Thornberry, along with Adam Smith, in advancing this as well. I think that the leadership recognizes that this is important. And I'll even give a little bit of credit to the first Trump administration in changing some focus to space, and the Biden administration for following on that. It's a little bit curious that now all of a sudden the Trump administration is cutting really key components of the space budget, resilient GPS, commercial sensing. A lot of things are being cut, all in the name of just giving more money to the Golden Dome, which we can talk about.
Oh, we're definitely going to hit on Golden Dome. But do you think the Space Force is getting the resources it needs?
No.
The one
Nope.
or the one budget to it? No. Okay.
Nope.
Why?
No, it's not because look,
What do they need?
the bottom line is that space is where we, I think, are most at risk of falling behind, and that's still the case, even though we're doing better. And so space should be the priority. I mean, in very broad terms, if you appointed me Secretary of Defense for a day, one of the
Secretary of War.
Secretary of Defense. Thank you. Yeah. Congress has not approved that political stunt. I'm sure there are colleagues of mine who are trying, but one of the first things I would do is just say this needs to be a bigger priority. We have a lot of money that we're pouring into things like the F-35. An aircraft that's out there to fight China that can't quite reach China. We should actually be putting a lot more money into things like space.
And so right now, I think a lot of people's eyes are on the money going into Golden Dome. Is $175 billion a realistic price tag? And is 2028 achievable? And what does that even look like?
What are you trying to achieve?
I'm not the president.
No one knows. I just want someone to explain to me exactly what Golden Dome is supposed to do, because no one has actually articulated a theory of deterrence that works for Golden Dome. No one has explained why, although mutually assured destruction has kept us safe since 1945, suddenly we are going to change tactics. And if the administration would simply provide a theory of the case, then we could have a discussion about whether this is even a worthwhile investment. Because we just heard Kerry Bingen talk about how Russia and China are developing a lot of alternative delivery methods, specifically because of the defenses that we currently have. And I've asked this question in committee. Administration officials have said, "Oh no, Golden Dome does not protect against sea launched nuclear or underwater nuclear weapons that Russia is developing, for example. Doesn't protect against that. You have this whole space-based interceptor layer at the same time as we know now that Russia is putting a nuclear weapon in space or has the capability of doing so. So in other words, what that means is that with the push of one button, Russia could wipe out our entire space-based interceptor layer. If they actually wanted to attack the United States, why wouldn't they push that button? And the administration has no answers for any of this.
Why do you think there is that dearth of information, right? Because there was a directive that came down to stop people from talking about it. It was very obvious that space.
Well, look, there's two explanations for how we got into this situation where we're trying to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, even though the estimate is about 500 billion and they're talking about 130. There's two explanations for how we got into this place with no theory of the case, and yet we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on something that perhaps is a waste of money, perhaps is a brilliant idea, or perhaps is really dangerous. One answer is that every nuclear strategist, including everybody who worked in the first Trump administration, basically everyone who worked in this for 70 years was wrong, and thank God Donald Trump came around and said, you know what we need is a Golden Dome. Everybody else was wrong, but this is going to keep us safe. The other possible explanation is that Donald Trump saw something that his friend had and wanted the golden version of it, and thus we have the Golden Dome.
Which friend?
And when Netanyahu, obviously, oh, that's iron, well, we'll have a golden one. Since no one can justify why we're spending this money, you take a wild guess. How many people out here support Golden Dome today? No one's on it.
No one's going to raise their hand to that.
All right, okay, interesting.
I see one, and I know who he is.
How many supported Golden Dome 12 months ago before the president mentioned it? How many of my colleagues on committee were saying, you know what, everything we're doing is wrong. We should be focused on putting space-based interceptors up there. I mean, it's unbelievable how much everyone has just become subservient to this idea because it came from Trump without any actual justification. So look, in the best case scenario, we're just going to blow several $100 billion of US taxpayer money on something with no proof of concept, no theory, no studies to show how it would work, not even a debate in committee, a legitimate debate in committee about whether it's a good use of money. But the worst case scenario is it actually makes us a lot more dangerous.
Do you think China and Russia will take it as a provocation? They have obviously said they don't like the idea of it, but what happens if it actually gets built? Does that complicate nuclear strategy, an arms race, arms control?
It almost assures an arms race. Because China is going to say, we have to get around this. And Russia is going to say, we have to get around this. And I mean, the history of this. It's pretty clear. Russia started developing hypersonics when we pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Before 1972 or whenever it was signed, there were a lot more nuclear weapons in the world than there were afterwards. We know how this works. And when you have a lot more nuclear weapons and a lot of alternative delivery methods that can't be detected, it makes the world less stable. That makes us all less safe. So we have a theory of deterrence that's kept us safe since 1945. If we want to upend that theory of deterrence and say, nope, we're going to take a totally different strategy, we're not going to promise that we just wipe you out. We are going to stop you from attacking us. Then make that case. Explain why that works. And explain how it makes us more safe before we blow hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars on it. That's all I ask. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, that is my job to ask these questions, and it's pretty amazing that the administration can't give any answers to any of them.
Have you raised these concerns to General Gutlein?
I have raised these concerns with everyone I can talk to, and I think that, look, I think that what what many in the Air Force and the Space Force would say is there are a lot of things sort of under the Golden Dome banner that we can invest in that are important. And I agree with that. We need to improve our sensing capabilities because we know that we cannot detect hypersonics right now. Of course, this is because we designed the system for a world that didn't have hypersonics. There was a reason why we all stopped developing them. But be that as it may, we have to improve sensing. We obviously have to do a lot to improve defenses right around our military bases today, from things like drones, right?
Yeah, spiders,
and that's considered part, right? I mean, that's sort of considered under the Golden Dome banner. Tremendous bipartisan support for that. We've had hearings on it. We all agree this is a good investment. These are kinds of investments that we should make. But putting a whole bunch of space-based interceptors up in the, in low Earth orbit, that, according to existing theory, significantly destabilizes things, and that Russia can take out with the push of one button, we ought to ask some questions about that before we make that investment.
Last question before we get the boot here. Does it make a difference for Spacecom to be in Colorado or Alabama, or does that just not matter to a New Englander?
That's a good question. Kennedy was originally going to put a whole bunch of NASA stuff in Cambridge, and then when Johnson came in, a whole bunch of that moved to Texas. So I understand how this sometimes happens, but the point is it's a political decision. And I would just love to see the administration make decisions based on facts and studies and legitimate debates, not based on the whims of the president. I think that would be great for our national security.
That's the last word. Congressman, thanks for the time today. All right, our final guest of the morning is a senior leader on foreign policy and national security. Please welcome back to the Axios stage, Congressman Michael McCaul. I'm glad to see we didn't scare you off, because you were actually one of the first guests when we launched this newsletter.
I was.
So
yeah.
It's been a long time. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
What is top of mind for you as we sit on this stage, talk about space security, talk about international competition, and talk about Congress back this fall?
I think the great power competition with China is, I would say, the number one threat in terms of space. When they launched the hypersonic that went around the world with precision and landed with precision, it was a real wake-up call for our military. We didn't have that capability. And to get to the interceptors and why that's necessary is because of the advanced missile technology that China has. If I could draw back, in 1997, I was a very young federal prosecutor here.
I was 3.
And I prosecuted a case, the Johnny Chun case. And the crux of the case was that China was flowing money into the presidential campaign, the Clinton campaign, and you have to ask the question why. They wanted really 3 things. They wanted satellite technology, they wanted dual-use aerospace technology, and they wanted to get into the WTO. And since that time, they have advanced it extraordinarily to the point where we're in the same, almost on the same level. When you get the classified briefing, we're still ahead, but just by a very narrow margin. So, in a way, they achieved their mission.
Mm-hmm. What's maintaining that winning margin right now?
Their investments in high technology, both advanced semiconductors, AI technology, which is going to be the future of modern warfare. You look at what's happening in Ukraine with UAVs. I passed the AUKUS bill, so we can work on AI, quantum, advanced weapon systems with Australia and the UK to counter China in the Indo-Pacific. That really, we're paying a lot of attention to Ukraine. Very important. I spent a lot of political capital on that issue. I would say Israel. I just got back from Israel. I saw, their Arrow defense system, their David Sling, their, not Golden Dome, but their Iron Dome, and their Iron Beam, which is the new technology of lasers that can intercept at a much cheaper rate. I mean, you're talking about $1 a shot versus up to $1 million. And that's what we currently spend on those things.
Do you think the U.S. will adopt more directed energy, like an iron beam in the near future?
Yeah.
We have to.
And I had the demonstration in Israel, and it's and a lot of these companies are incorporated in the United States. It seems to me that we could use, instead of reinventing the wheel, incorporate a lot of these ideas into what would be the Iron Dome. But then we have exquisite technologies in high orbit and low orbit space that only the United States government's capable of doing.
And so you brought up the AUKUS bill, the AUKUS Improvement Act.
Yeah.
Let's hit on that real quick, and then we can maybe go into alliances more broadly. Do you think AUKUS will survive Elbridge Colby's review?
Gotta hope so. And it has strong bipartisan support. When I saw they were going to do a review, that's fine. But to scrap this program after all the political capital we spent, and not only that, but our relationship with Australia and the UK, if that's torn apart, it'll cause grave damage in the Indo-Pacific, primarily because Australia, if you look at the geography in the Indo-Pacific, it's really the beachhead. And if you're going to put your assets, the northern Darwin, it's called, on the northern front where I've been to, is really the beachhead to counter a threat from China, which is extraordinarily real right now. And why would you scrap something like that? I mean, you go back to my dad's war, World War II, the Indo-Pacific, I don't know how they pulled that off logistically. We're going to need partners in the Pacific like Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and other nations. And I'll say this too, if China invades Taiwan, it will look something like this. It will be a massive, major cyber attack on the island. They could hit the west coast of the United States. They will do a massive jamming on the island. They'll shut all communications in orbit, the anti-satellite to blinding satellites, to jamming satellites, such that we won't have any eyes and ears on the ground if we don't have that defense capability in the Indo-Pacific. You talk to Indo-PACOM, our Indo-PACOM commander is brilliant. He just says, I just need more money. There are a lot of great things I can do. He said, there are a lot of wicked things I can do, he said, in the Indo-Pacific, but he needs the financing. And I think reconciliation has bring, billions of dollars to the table now that we can put into this defense system.
If the U.S. was to scrap AUKUS, would that embolden China? Would that maybe move the Davidson window closer?
100%. I always say what keeps Chairman Xi up at night is the fact that we are now, well, two things. One, the beast of the ocean, the nuclear submarine now. We're rotating our nuclear subs in the region. That terrifies him. The second thing is the joint collaboration on advanced weapon systems with AI technology. He's desperately trying to catch up to us in AI. DeepSeek is a good example of how they invented AI. And unfortunately, going back to the case I worked on, the Chinese, they can either innovate it themselves, which they rarely do. They can steal it, which they do a lot, or we can sell it to them. Unfortunately, we sold them the chips that they used to make DeepSeek. It came from NVIDIA, not to call out a company, but that's where it came from. I worked a lot on export controls. Yeah. Why are we selling this stuff, especially stuff that could be...
Are there not restrictions on those?
There are now, but there were not at the time, and I worked hard with Commerce to get those restrictions put in place. What I worry about are some of these, the thinking that we can auction off export licenses if you give us a 15% profit return on our sales. There's no reason for us to be selling, basically weapons-grade AI technology.
And this growing relationship between China, Russia, and North Korea, how are you seeing that evolve? What are the threats of it? And does that then bleed into the space domain as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the hypersonics is a good example. I think, Russia is now falling into third place. We're in first place. You go back to the Kennedy administration, it was really not just the wonderment of space exploration. There was a military backdrop to all this. The higher ground militarily always prevails. So being superior in space means we're superior, in the world. And so that quest for space superiority, we had that for many, many years. But now we're losing ground to China, and we have to wake up to that.
Is that losing ground because of, like Kerry said, satellite production? Is that because of anti-satellite arsenals, both, or what else?
Sure. There's anti-satellite. There's also the beaming, where you can blind a satellite. Those two factors can cause a lot of damage. And so China's getting very efficient at that.
And you represent Texas. Nature, the publication, recently named it a space hotspot. What is Texas's role, maybe even your district's role in this space race? How do you see that exploding?
It goes back to the Johnson Space Center. It's amazing when you look at your iPhone, there's more technology in that phone than there was in 1969 when we landed a man on the moon. That's extraordinary to me. And we've come a long ways, but people ask the question, why haven't we been able to go back?
Or to Mars.
And Mars and beyond. Or why is the moon important? Why is space important? Space dominance is important from a military standpoint, but then there are minerals on the moon. Also, to project from the moon to Mars, that's extremely important. So we know that China's trying to get there, go back. India has developed a good space advantage as well.
And India's growing a little close to China and Russia, at least on Twitter, it looks like.
When I saw Modi with the Unholy Alliance, I call him, I just about did what my pants. It's just like, oh my God.
Yes.
I mean, it was bad enough, Russia, China, Kim Jong-un, and now Modi, because Modi, I think he's doing it for two reasons. One, he needs the energy. That's why he needs energy from Russia. Cheap energy. And so that's why secondary sanctions are important, I think, with Ukraine. I hope the president will advance that. But I also think the tariffs had an impact on him and is pushing him closer to China, Russia, and North Korea. And that's, to me, it's very dangerous. And we got to keep India on our side. I met with Modi a year ago, and I said, you got to get off Russian weapon systems. We're not going to sell you. I'm not going to sign off on these weapons if you're going to continue to buy Russian military. And he said, I'm just buying legacy systems or maintenance for legacy systems, not new military equipment. With this new alliance we're seeing, I don't know.
Last question before we go.
Yeah.
President Trump suggested selling F-35s to India earlier this year, I believe, or late last year. Is that realistic?
I mean, it is. We sold F-16s to Turkey, our NATO ally, in exchange for Sweden being ascended into NATO. I would not sign off on those until Erdogan
F-35s, yeah.
let Sweden ascend into NATO. But that's always a tricky deal. I remember being in Afghanistan in a Black Hawk helicopter, and the flares went off, and I said, what the hell is that? And they said, those are Stingers, sir. And I said, you mean the ones we sold them or we gave to them, the Mujahideen? They said, yes, sir. So it's always a dangerous game who you sell the weapons to. You don't want them to blow back on you. I would say it's better they buy it from us than from China, because it makes them a closer ally to us rather than China.
Awesome. We're going to have to leave it there. We're all out of time. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Colin.
To you guys in the audience. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for coming out early this morning. And we'll see you at the Future of Defense Summit in October. Have a good one.